This is a turtle. And this is a boulder. Wait, no, that's actually still a turtle.
I like turtles.
Today, the most dangerous thing a turtle can do is cross a road. They move so slowly that algae literally grows on their shells, and their primary defense mechanism is just pulling their head inside and hoping whatever is trying to eat them gets bored and walks away. But back in prehistoric South America, turtles were not the ones hiding in their shells. They were the ones making other things wish they could hide in a shell. They grew to the size of cars. They had shells harder than most modern armor plating, and they were so massive that full-grown predators would have genuinely reconsidered their life choices just by looking at one. What happened to modern turtles that made them so small? What threats back then were forcing turtles to evolve so enormous? And what made these giant armored tanks eventually disappear? The giant prehistoric turtle of northern South America, known as Stupendemous geographicus, was in fact stupendous. It weighed up to 2,500 pounds, which is heavier than a grizzly bear, heavier than a baby sperm whale, and about as heavy as a rhinoceros. Modern river turtles in the Amazon top out around 200 pounds on a great day. Stupendemous was roughly 10 times heavier. If this thing crawled over your foot, you wouldn't just be in pain, you wouldn't have a foot anymore. But the most terrifying part wasn't just the weight, it was the shell. Unlike modern turtles, whose shells are essentially a smooth dome of keratin and bone, Stupendemous had horns. Actual horns jutting forward from the front of its shell like a battering ram. Scientists believe these were used for combat, male against male, slamming into each other like prehistoric tanks fighting over territory in the flooded river basins that covered what is now Venezuela and Colombia. We know this because fossilized shells have been found with puncture wounds that perfectly match the horn dimensions of other Stupendemous. This turtle wasn't just big, it was aggressive and built for war. So, okay, this turtle was absolutely massive, but why did it get so giant? Isn't the whole strategy of a turtle to just hide inside its shell and wait things out? Yeah, that strategy hits a wall when the predator is big enough to just pick up the shell entirely. See, Stupendemous lived during the Miocene epoch, roughly 5 to 10 million years ago, in what is now the northern Amazon basin and the Orinoco River system. This region wasn't the dense jungle we see today. It was a vast network of wetlands, shallow lakes, and flooded plains. Basically, one enormous prehistoric swamp stretching across northern South America. And that swamp was absolutely packed with things that wanted to eat you. Things like Purussaurus. Purussaurus was a caiman, a relative of modern caimans still found in the Amazon today. Except Purussaurus was 40 feet long and weighed 6 tons. To put that in perspective, the biggest saltwater crocodiles alive today reach about 17 feet. Purussaurus was more than twice that. It didn't hunt at the edges of the water. It was the apex predator of the entire ecosystem, and it ate turtles. Modern caimans eat modern Amazon turtles. The relationship has not changed, only the scale. If you're a turtle sharing a swamp with a 40-foot caiman, you have two options. Become incredibly fast, which isn't really on the table for a turtle, or become so big and so heavily armored that even a 6-ton caiman looks at you and thinks it's just not worth the energy. Stupendemous chose option 2. By becoming massive, Stupendemous effectively became uneatable. A shell over 9 feet long isn't something you crack open with a bite, even if your bite force is strong enough to crush bone. The shell of Stupendemous was so thick and reinforced that Purussaurus would have had to work harder than any meal was worth. It's the same logic giant tortoises use today. Being enormous is expensive in terms of calories, but it buys you immunity from almost everything. And what was Stupendemous eating to get that big? Plants. mostly aquatic vegetation, mollusks, and fish. A slow, reliable, calorie-dense diet available in unlimited quantities in the flooded plains it called home. The prehistoric Amazon swamp was essentially an all-you-can-eat buffet that never closed, which is exactly the environment where you can afford to grow this large. So how terrifying was the world that produced this turtle? You have to understand what the prehistoric Amazon basin actually was. Today, when people think of the Amazon, they picture the jungle. But for millions of years before the Andes Mountains fully rose and redirected the drainage systems, northern South America was covered by a massive inland sea and wetland system called Lake Pebas. It was one of the largest freshwater systems that has ever existed on Earth, covering an area roughly the size of modern-day Western Europe. Rivers flowed westward. The entire basin was shallow, warm, and teeming with life unlike anything alive today. This is the environment that shaped the animals of prehistoric Amazonia into monsters. Stupendemous wasn't the only giant turtle. Carbonemys cofrini, nicknamed coal turtle, was discovered in Colombia and lived around 60 million years ago, right after the dinosaurs went extinct. It had a shell nearly 6 feet long and a skull so massive that it could likely eat crocodilians whole. Not fight them, eat them. Carbonemys had a beak powerful enough to crush bone, and scientists believe it wasn't strictly an herbivore. It would eat whatever was available, including other reptiles. Think about that for a second. A turtle that eats crocodiles. This wasn't a weird accident. This was the logical conclusion of a world where the dinosaurs had just vanished and every ecological role was suddenly vacant. Something had to step up and be the apex predator of the river systems, while the mammals were still tiny and figuring things out. In South America, the turtles volunteered. Modern Amazonian turtles still carry remnants of this ancient toughness. The giant South American river turtle, known locally as the Arrau, can reach nearly 3 feet in length and over 100 pounds. They undertake massive migrations up the Amazon and the Orinoco rivers to nest on the same beaches every year, a behavior that has remained unchanged for millions of years. Female Arrau turtles return to the exact same beaches where they were born, navigating hundreds of miles of river by sensing the Earth's magnetic field. Scientists tracking them with satellite tags found they navigate more precisely than most GPS systems. But here's where the story turns darker, because if Stupendemous was so perfectly designed that nothing could eat it, why did it disappear? The same thing that changed everything else in South America. The Andes rose. Between 5 and 10 million years ago, the Andes Mountains were still actively uplifting, growing taller over geological time. As they rose, they completely rewired the drainage system of the continent. The rivers that had flowed westward into the Pacific reversed direction and began flowing east toward the Atlantic. Lake Pebas, that enormous inland sea, drained away. The shallow, warm, endlessly productive wetlands that has supported animals like Stupendemous and Purussaurus shrank down into what is now the Amazon River system. The ecosystem didn't disappear, but it compressed dramatically. Gone were the vast flooded plains with unlimited aquatic vegetation and warm, shallow water as far as you could see. What replaced it was deeper, faster-moving river channels, an environment that favors agility over mass. Purussaurus shrank down into the modern caiman. The giant aquatic turtles shrank into the modern river turtles we see today. It wasn't a catastrophe. It was a slow squeeze over millions of years, and only the animals that could adapt survived. And then, we showed up. South American indigenous communities have harvested Arrau turtles and their eggs for thousands of years, which is sustainable at a small scale. But when European colonization brought commercial harvesting to the Amazon and Orinoco basins in the 1700s and 1800s, the scale became catastrophic. Historical records describe beaches so covered with Arrau turtles during nesting season that you could walk across their shells from one side to the other. Tens of millions of eggs were harvested annually to render into oil for lamps and cooking. The population collapsed by an estimated 90% in under 2 centuries. The Arrau is currently listed as vulnerable. The turtles that survived the rise of the Andes survived the extinction of their giant relatives, survived millions of years of caimans and anacondas, and everything the prehistoric Amazon could throw at them are now struggling because we like lamp oil and turtle soup. It follows the exact same pattern as the giant sloths, the mammoths, the ground birds, every megafauna that made it through every natural catastrophe only to run directly into humans and our talent for harvesting things faster than they can reproduce. But here's what's strange. Unlike the sloths, the turtles aren't gone. The Arrau is still here, still migrating up the Orinoco, still navigating by magnetic field, still doing the same thing their enormous ancestors did in the same river systems 60 million years ago, just in a smaller package. And if you get into a boat on the right stretch of the Venezuelan Orinoco at the right time of year, you can still see hundreds of them hauled out on sandbars, warming themselves in the sun, completely unbothered. Looking like boulders, which is almost exactly how Stupendemous must have looked, rising out of the shallows of a Miocene swamp, while a 40-foot caiman quietly decided to go find something smaller to eat. The shell is still the same. The stubbornness is still the same. Evolution just turned down the volume. Don't mistake that for weakness. The turtle body plan has survived 5 mass extinctions. They watched the dinosaurs go. They outlasted the giant sloths. They are quite literally one of the most durable survival strategies nature has ever invented. A design so good that in hundreds of millions of years, the only major change has been the size. They became smaller, they became quieter, and they became very, very good at being overlooked, which, if you know anything about turtles, was probably the plan all along. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Please leave some support and subscribe since we're brand new. And please leave suggestions too. I'm gonna be reading every single comment you guys leave. So if you want to see a video about something, just let me know down below.